So good afternoon. Pleasure to welcome the Greek Minister of Economy, Pierrakakis. Fantastic that you can make it. I know this is a week of the ECOFIN and that you're here. Very, very happy to welcome you. We as a think tank have, of course, followed this the last 10 years, 15 years, what has happened in Greece and also in the EU as a whole and the Eurozone very closely. We have published a lot. And I'm very happy that we can now have a kind of a reflection about that period, but also, as we discussed, looking forward. And I'm also very happy that we can have Cynthia to moderate the debate, because she published even reports for DG ECFIN on the subject, a kind of a post-evaluation of what we can now learn from this crisis. So very happy to welcome you. We're also very happy to learn, let's say, about how you managed this transition, which I think is extremely remarkable and is important. And we see, other countries are now struggling, and some people are saying, what have we learned from that country? And that is, I think, extremely important. So again, from my side, us on behalf of SEPS, welcome, and a pleasure to welcome you. And I pass the floor to Cynthia to introduce you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and very welcome to SEPS. I'm also extremely pleased to have the opportunity to have this conversation with the minister. As Karel said, we have been working and following actually the events in Greece for a very long time. I even have a personal story. So I joined SEPS in 2009. Mm-hmm. So I arrived here as a postdoc, and I had an interview with Daniel Gross. He was our director of research. And I said, I come from international economics. I know very little about Europe. And then he told me, no worries, you will learn. And he said, it looks not very pretty, and I'm sure we will have a lot of work to do. And he said, we start on Monday with Greece. So we started basically to look at the macroeconomic indicators of Greece, but actually also other countries. And we have been following the situation basically for a decade until the end of the third adjustment program. So quite a lot of events, and I'm very pleased actually to be here today with a very different narrative, because things have changed quite a lot. And as Karel said, maybe there are some lessons to be learned by other countries, which 15 years ago were in a much better position, and today they may be called to make difficult choices. But without further ado, I would like to first introduce you. So Kyriakos Pierrakakis is the Minister of Economic and Finance, but actually you have quite a lot of experience in government. So you first served as a Minister of Education, and then as a Minister of Digitalization, which I think actually is quite a key task, knowing a bit the situation where Greece was 15 years ago. And you have done quite a lot of changes in the country. So maybe the first thing I would like to ask you is to do a bit of tour d'horizon and to have your interpretation, your views of how the situation has evolved, and maybe what were the key events or the key turning point that actually made the situation really shifting towards a much more positive narrative.
Thank you so much for this invitation. It's great to be here at SEPS and to draw from something which was mentioned before at the first introduction. The post-evaluation was not a post-mortem. This is what I would start from, because in reality, Greece managed to overcome an existential crisis. If you look at the numbers, we lost almost 25 points of GDP, which is equivalent in real terms to what happened at the Great Depression in the United States. So we had acute social costs accumulated in that I would describe as a lost decade, in a sense, even though we gained by passing very significant reforms which we should have otherwise passed previously. But having said this, it was a very steep and very deep decline. And the first lesson to be learned, I think, by other European countries, even countries which implemented similar programs, is that ideally your political economy and your political system should accommodate for swift implementation of those reforms rather than having prolonged processes where you propose alternatives which are not realistic in real terms. This is why, I mean, on the positive side, last year, 4 out of the 6 countries of the European Union that had a headline surplus were countries that implemented such programs in the previous decade. On the negative side, the only distinction of Greece to the other countries is that we needed to implement 3 of those programs rather than 1. It's like doing the right thing after having excluded all other possibilities, as a quote says. But in this regard, the social costs were significant, they were huge, but right now we are back and we're open. And this is manifested by a positive feedback loop. First of all, fiscally, Greece is producing primary surpluses and headline surpluses. We have an extremely rapid de-escalation of debt. We delivered the draft budget for 2026. The projection is that we're going to be at 137.6% in terms of debt to GDP, which sounds high, but if you think of where it was, especially post-COVID, we were at almost 210%. So the de-escalation is extremely steep. Growth-wise, the projection is for 2.4% for next year, which is much higher than the EU average right now, both at the European Union level and at the Eurozone level. And overall unemployment is going to reach 8.8%, which is the historical 2008 low before we entered the crisis. So I think we have a positive feedback loop, which is fiscal sustainability. We resolved the issues of the fragility of the banks. Our banking system had a very high ratio of NPLs. Now it's less than 5%, and it's continuously dropping, non-performing loans. And we produce reforms. We have produced, if you look at the numbers, almost 100 reforms in the last 6 years through a very positive, reform-minded policy implementation. So this is the positive element. There are still challenges that need to be met, because if we look at the economic model of Greece that failed in 2008, fundamentally we were a country that was growing fast, but it was primarily growing through consumption. Investment to GDP was low, exports to GDP was low, productivity was low. Have we managed to resolve all of those elements of the equation? We're in the process. I'll cite 2 numbers. Investments to GDP when we assumed office were at 11%. Now we're going to be close to 18% with the 2026 budget. 17.7 is the projection. Exports to GDP, they were at the ballpark figure of 20% in 2008 when we entered the crisis, more or less. Now they're at around 42%. The EU average sits at 51%. So we're still below the EU average. We should actually, given the size and the characteristics of Greece, be somewhere around 60%. And we still have a productivity challenge to solve. We're doing our best to continuously and sustainably produce increases in productivity. I think we have a productivity challenge in front of us, especially given the demographic challenge, which for Greece and for many other places in Europe is acute. I mean, this was a discussion which we also had yesterday and today at the Eurogroup and ECOFIN meetings. Trying to grow while having a demographic decline is a significant challenge. On the other hand, if there is a lesson to be learned from this, is that this positive feedback loop is absolutely possible to achieve. People who lived through the Greek crisis, policymakers, European policymakers, who negotiated the bailout deals for Greece, once they see the fiscal performance and the economic performance of Greece right now, their impression is that the world is upside down compared to what they were describing and discussing back then. So many things have changed. They are positive. You mentioned my previous capacity as digital minister. The digital transformation of Greece is immense. We were the first country to propose the COVID certificate, for instance, at the European Union level. We were probably the first to implement it. We have digitized more than 2,200 public services. We have a government platform called gov.gr where all new services are introduced. We have digital IDs. And once all the RRF projects kick in, we will have pretty much digitized everything in the next 3 years. All services. We know how many they are, by the way. We know that we still need to digitize an extra 3,000 services. There are still, of course, significant challenges to be met, but I would overall say that the trajectory is absolutely positive. And we know how to learn from mistakes. We know how to integrate lessons because we faced, in the last decade, existential mistakes, which were historical. So we don't plan to repeat the same old mistakes of the past. If there is one that should not be repeated, and I'll conclude my long answer with this, is that we don't plan to pass the bill to the next generation as the previous generations that governed Greece did. We plan to have sustainable public finances and a growth mindset. And there are many things that we still need to do to achieve that.
Thanks, and I want to come back actually to this last point in a moment. Maybe just the last point, looking backward, then I really want to go deeper into the future. Do you think that, so this year is 10 years from the referendum. Mm-hmm. Do you think it was a pivotal moment?
It certainly was, for two reasons. The first reason doesn't necessarily touch solely upon the referendum, but I think it was the peak of the crisis in a way which further led many Greeks to emigrate. I remember Tom Friedman's article from the New York Times from 2010, where he said at the end of the article that he wouldn't be looking at the bond spreads or the macroeconomic figures, that he would be looking at what young Greeks do on the ground. And he ended the article by saying, if you see them leaving the country, start selling. If you see them staying and many coming back, start buying. I think that this was probably the best KPI to see vis-a-vis the prospects of both Greece and any country, actually. So what the Euro referendum did in a way was a pivot. If we had left European institutions, for us, the North in the compass, in our Third Republic, was always to be at the core of Europe, to converge with the core of Europe. So leaving the core of Europe would have been an existential disaster. So this was pivotal. The second reason why it was pivotal is because it was the end of illusions. We had an opposition in Greece which overpromised that certain things were feasible, which were not. And this was proven in a very problematic negotiation because it was extremely costly for Greece. It was the highest tuition paid at the European level for decades. But it was paid, but it was there. So right now, fiscal prudence, after having done this, after having completed a series of negotiations, attempts, one bailout, second bailout, third bailout. After that history, right now, fiscal prudence, I think, for a generation is a regime. We understand that the same mistake should not be repeated again. And this is why the moment is pivotal. It is pivotal because the illusions were actually underlined as such, rather than as realistic policy alternatives.
That's quite interesting. I remember that the night of the referendum, we were all at Karat's place. So he invited all the SEPS team to his place to actually watch the referendum in the garden. And we all got extremely stressed about the interpretation of the outcome because, okay, we had 60%, but it was very difficult to see. So this is there are quite a lot of memories actually related to these events. Now, maybe back to one of the points that you mentioned earlier about digital reforms. I mean, digital reform was one of the many reforms which had to be implemented in Greece. I mean, quite a lot during the adjustment programs, but actually the digital reform that you implemented came later, after the end of the programs, right?
It's from 2019 to 2023 and still sustained and continued today by my successor at the ministry.
So, I mean, reforms were one core part also of the adjustment programs, because it's not only about austerity. I mean, you really need to change the governance and the performance mechanism of an economy. What kind of reforms do you think are key to achieve these changes? Maybe digitalization is one, but what kind of reforms are actually key to transform an economy?
Well, there are many things that one should do. Certain things are obvious, they're horizontal, they are things that every country should do, and there are other things which are extremely idiosyncratic, because they touch upon your own competitive advantages and your own historicity. Digitization is certainly a horizontal type of reform, meaning that when I speak about it, it resonates at all 27 member states. You should do what Estonia has done as an end result. What's the end result of Estonia? Single point of contact, all services provided digitally without the need of physical presence, with the exception of 3, if I remember correctly, in Estonia. Getting married, getting divorced, and buy a house. All the rest you can do pretty much digitally. So that should be the north in the compass. The map is yours, meaning that the way to get there is different country to country. Estonia built its institutional roadmap after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The roadmap is not going to be the same for Greece, Italy, Spain, etc. We should all do our own version of this because certain countries, Germany is federal in nature, so it will have a different system in attempting to digitize institutions. The second lesson on this, by the way, is that digital is not about technology. Digital is about management. It's a mindset change, meaning that you need to have people who understand technology in the room together with legal experts and economists when you design policy. This is why COVID vaccinations were successful in Greece. But it's a management change because you need to think in terms of simplifications, systems, delivery of services. And this is what should be done, especially in Europe, where, if I were to be blunt, I would say states, governments, governmental systems have never been designed. They have occurred. And they have occurred as an accumulation of parallel decisions made by policymakers at different levels. But citizens don't care about this. They don't care about Minister A, Minister B, Minister C. They care about the end result, the provision of service. I want to renew my driver's license easily at one point of contact. I don't care about the regional government, the local government, the federal government, the national government. I want the simplicity of service. So this has certain things in common. You need a digital ID. You need data interoperability. You don't need to circulate paper. You should digitize data across your state. So all of those things, you need a national strategy. But at the end of the day, we'll know where we should end up to. Other types of things are extremely idiosyncratic reform-wise. When I speak in other countries about the completion of the cadastral process, it doesn't resonate because they have had the cadastre for decades. We hadn't. Completing the cadastral process has been a challenge in Greece since the reign of King Otto in the 19th century. It will be completed now because we're digitizing the whole system. Or the fact that Greece was the only country pretty much, certainly in Europe, pretty much in the world, which prohibited having universities that don't belong to the public sector in Greece, which are not public. Since the 50s, this was prohibited in Greece. We changed that. We changed it actually by leveraging EU law, by interpreting our constitution in light of EU law. But again, this doesn't resonate internationally because this is idiosyncratic. It has to do with your national institutional history and pathway. But at the end of the day, the mindset should be the same. You need to unlock potential. If we were to draw from an analogy from the IT sphere, I would say certain advantages are self-evident. You have the hardware. You need the software to unlock it. You need the policies to unlock them. I mentioned the university system. I had the Deloitte study in my hands when I was Minister of Education, saying that once you internationalize your public university system and you allow for universities which are not public to operate at the same time, and you open up the system internationally, Greece stood to gain 1 point of GDP out of this. And there are many other such policy areas which can vertically produce this competitive advantage and growth potential. This has to do with things that you haven't historically done. So you have a self-evident advantage of doing the obvious and unlocking potential. In parallel, you need to be agile, nimble, and swift vis-a-vis unlocking potential of new challenges that you have in front of you. We cannot think about productivity increases without integrating AI in both our private and our public sectors. We cannot think of productivity increases if we do not think across the board in all of those fourth industrial revolution technologies with regards to their integration in the system. And we can certainly not do that leap, that exponential leap, while not having resolved the outstanding issues of the past, like the ones that I described before, because even digitization is an outstanding issue. It's not an emerging challenge. Not circulating paper in government services between the second and the third floor is not an AI discussion. It's a pure I discussion. It's whether or not your system is intelligent or not.
That's quite interesting. It makes me think that actually, okay, we were speaking about reforms, but you spoke a lot about productivity gains and actually gains in terms of GDP, which are not necessarily associated with big spending of money, but actually just change the system. And this looks like a complete shift in the mindset compared to what I learned about Greece before the crisis, where you move from stimulating basically GDP through expenditure to actually changing the structure and unlocking capacity.
I think you're right. But overall, isn't this the proper mindset overall that every country should have? If you look at how EU funds have evolved in the process, there's a difference between the traditional European structural funds and the structure of the RRF. We're huge proponents of the latter, of the structure of the RRF, because it forced us to think in terms of reform potential for every penny spent, for every euro spent. We had to connect it with a specific reform. This was what was mandated by the design of the RRF. This is what will continue at the new phase, at the new era of the MFF, of the European Structural Funds. This is good. You shouldn't be thinking solely in terms of spending to achieve higher levels of growth. You should be thinking in terms of reform, eliminating barriers that exist. This is the whole Draghi report discussion. Barriers that exist between member states of the European Union should be eliminated. I would argue that barriers exist within also member states of the European Union. That's the digitization and simplification challenge. And of course, you should think in terms of how you unlock your own potential, be that at a regional level, at a local level, or at a national level. We need this growth mindset. At the ECOFIN and the Eurogroup, we speak a lot about cross-border M&As to achieve this. But overall, we need to allow growth to flourish. And it can flourish with a strategy and with barrier elimination at the same time.
This is quite interesting at the time. In this city, there is a big debate emerging about the next MFF and the principles actually guiding the next MFF and whether this dualism between reforms and investment should continue and the extent to which it would continue. You mentioned the Draghi report. This is considered a bit the Bible and setting the scene for the growth strategy of Europe. What do you think are the key elements or what really needs to be done in order to implement the Draghi report or to achieve the objectives that it puts in terms of EU competitiveness?
We need to follow Faulkner's advice to young writers. Show, don't tell. Meaning that there is an institutional debate right now happening at the EU level, at the council level, and at the ministerial level. I think we will get the institutional reforms right. We don't need 27 efficient markets. We need one efficient market to achieve scale. There are certain self-evident things that we haven't done, again, at the European level for quite some time. Let me put it this way. This discussion, which has to do with competitiveness, also touches upon how you build your own competitive advantage. In technology, because technology, Schumpeter, creative destruction, technology lies at the epicenter of economic growth, and technological competition and technological challenges drive the way of sustainable increases in growth. In this regard, the wrong question to ask at the European level, and I'll connect this with the Draghi report, in my view, the dead wrong question to ask is, how can we build a European version of X, X being anything? If you think like that, you're not close to the technological frontier, you won't achieve it, you never achieved it. What you should be doing is the opposite. You should try to build sustainable advantage in areas where you can probably achieve it while being close to the technological frontier. We have a huge missed opportunity, 5G, where under Trump 1, the official stance of the American government effectively helped two European companies in this global competition, Ericsson and Nokia. And instead, we decided to keep spectrum auctions for 5G at the national level instead of pooling them at the European level. And instead of leveraging those funds to create ecosystems around the infrastructural players of telecom. Had we done that, this was an area where we had the advantage, especially in the Western world. Had we done that, we would have managed to achieve much more significant progress. We shouldn't necessarily be thinking about making European alternatives. We should be growing European champions. And to grow European champions, you need to pool resources at the European level in the areas where that's the optimum policy. That was the obvious area to do it. We can still do it. We have lost time, but the window of opportunity is there for certain areas where technological champions are Europeans. We should double down and triple down on them. So that, I would say, is my comment number one. Comment number two is that if you think of the Draghi report's implications, he cites, and he did that citation also at the Financial Times, he cites the IMF calculation about the hidden barriers that exist between member states of the European Union in services and manufacturing. The number that the IMF puts is 110% in services, 44% in manufacturing. There are issues with the calculation. The calculation assumes homogeneity of consumption preferences, that we all consume wine equally at all member states of the European Union, or beer, or any consumption good, which we all know is not the case. But if we want to have the number, that's the number that we have. So barriers do exist. So let's eliminate them. We should have the political will to eliminate them. The biggest project that we can deliver at the European level is the Savings and Investment Union. That's the biggest thing we have in front of us. So it needs to be delivered. But even if we deliver the institutional reform, unless we have the cross-border M&A mentality, allowing for the creation of European, not national champions, we should grow European champions. Unless we allow for this, the natural implication of the Draghi report will not be there. And you need that in banking, you need that in technology, you need that basically in every sector. If I were to codify this, utilizing the political vocabulary of our times, I think we need European deals. And we should have them in a European mentality and a European mindset.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? So you spoke about technology and this idea of creating alternative to the US. I cannot agree more. I think it's really the wrong attitude. So now there is a lot of debate about AI. So the investments in AI in the US is just huge. I mean, we can never reach those kind of investment. So one of the big questions is, what should Europe do? When it comes to AI. Does it make sense to continue to try to catch up and follow the United States? Should we try to think of what comes next instead and focus on maybe, as you said, our own competitive advantage in other areas?
In the areas where you're close to the technological frontier, build ecosystems where you can grow your advantage. In the areas where you're away from technological frontier, that's what the Nobel laureates of the year also posit, John and Howitt. You need different market structures, and you need, I would say, to be much more synergistic with other international players rather than being antagonistic. If you are to be antagonistic and way away from the technological frontier, you won't catch up. Let's spend the resources where we can be the winners. So in order to create European champions, we need to understand where our advantage does exist or where it's close to existing. There are many companies that we could quote or cite. We know many of them. There are many others that we don't know of. And you also need the savings and the investment union apparatus so that you can grow those companies without necessarily needing an American investment bank in the process, which is fine. But ideally, you should have European investment banks also as a possibility on the ground for the growth of those companies. The relocation of those companies shouldn't be de facto necessitated. It shouldn't necessarily be a Delaware corporation that somehow delivers the mid or the end result of the institutional design of a startup. So you need institutional change, you need reforms, you need growth capabilities, investment capabilities, and investing and doing industrial policy fundamentally, not at the national level, but at the European level in the areas where we're at the technological edge. And generally, if I were to add on this, because you mentioned AI, reform-wise, not investment-wise, whenever I used to discuss this, again in my previous capacity with my associates, whenever they asked me the question, what shall we do about AI? I told them that's the wrong question, I'm not answering it, because it's technologically driven. For digital services, the question should be, how do I deliver this service? If AI, machine learning, LLMs is part of the answer, fine. It can be as simple as SMS. It can be anything. The question, the KPI, is service provision, is not technology implementation. In similar terms, I would say we should think like that in investment. It shouldn't be about let's invest in this and this and this. We pick the winners and we double down on the winners that we have on the ground. That's the strategy that everyone else is doing. And generally speaking, again, to be blunt, we will not regulate our way out of this. This traditional analysis of Europe regulates, America innovates, China imitates. This is over. We all need to do all three. We need to both regulate, innovate, and imitate on certain occasions, because sometimes it's better to be second than to be first. But it's a mindset shift that's necessitated, and we need it fast.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Maybe another follow-up, because you're saying a lot of interesting things. So I have quite a lot of questions. You spoke about industrial policy. This is also another big thing. Now, I mean, of course, one of the limitations that we have is that at EU level we have very limited resources. And when we go at national level, the resources are quite heterogeneously distributed. If we speak about industrial policy as driven by spending money, allocating money, what else can be done at European level when we speak about industrial policy, which then doesn't necessarily involve money?
Well, the 28th regime is the obvious answer, removing barriers at the administrative level. But I would also think in terms of leveraging resources that we already have. Defense policy is also an obvious case, which requires money. If you look at the SAFE instrument involves a budget. But if you look at it from the national perspective, it's 3 times the annual defense budget of Poland. So it is there, it is significant, it could be more ambitious. But we can do certain things at the European level with a certain layer of complementarity. The fact that we have the European Space Agency, which allows for common European procurement for space projects, has been extremely beneficial for Europe. And we have many success stories at the European level, which require the combination of funding, innovation, proper institutional design. Certain companies are success stories because of that. Airbus is a success story. Euronext is a success story at the European level. We have a proposed acquisition of the Athens Stock Exchange by Euronext, towards which we're very positive. Generally speaking, I heard Chancellor Merz saying that we need one European stock exchange. By the way, he's right. We should have a common liquidity pool. We should try, generally speaking, to leverage the resources that we already have. That's not additional funding, that's leveraging. And if you do that right, I mentioned the spectrum auction for 5G before. So what did Greece do at this? Because I think it's an interesting case study, how you can think out of the box. We got 372 million euros out of the spectrum auction. We didn't squeeze the market for 3 frequencies at 5G. 93 million euros out of this, 25%, we endowed a fund which is investing at 5G applications. And then many players came in and invested in that fund. Deutsche Telekom invested in that fund as well. But imagine for a moment, given the size of Greece, a spectrum auction which is not 372 million euros and a fund that's 100 million euros, 93. Imagine if you have an auction of 5 billion euros at the European level, you get half of that funding and you leverage it through the European Investment Bank. And then this is an ecosystem analysis of the whole 5G ecosystem, and it invests in those applications while deploying the infrastructure. This is industrial policy at its best, right? And you're doing it in an area where you're not trying to catch up. You're doing it in an area where you're leading. That's why I said that was a very innovative idea at the Greek level, but the level shouldn't have been the Greek level. It should have all along been the Brussels level.
What do you think? What is the main obstacle to actually the reason why we do not have a single stock exchange? Do you think it's essentially protecting domestic players or protecting the status quo? Why don't we have a single stock exchange in Europe?
Well, we're continuously increasing in terms of integration of stock exchanges. We're not in the same place where we were 30 years ago. So you have positive change. There are transaction costs that are involved in such an equation. There is a mindset shift that is also necessary to a certain extent. We already have strong players that are protective of their interests. There are many things at once. But once you understand, once you're cognizant of the fact that it's in your interest to pool the resources and have a broader access to a much, much larger liquidity pool, then you have a roadmap indirectly because you have a compass, you have a north in the compass. And most of us, I think, understand this need. The problem with the savings and investment union policy discussions overall, because this is a function of the SIU, in effect, the common liquidity pools. The problem is that we're all for it, with certain asterisks which touch upon national sensitivities, as in most things. But compromise sounds bad as a word in many languages. It certainly does in mine, in Greek. But it's absolutely necessary to move the European project forward. And if we do not start quickly removing those asterisks while doing specific cross-border M&As on the ground, it will not be achieved. And I'm mentioning this because right now, the non-delivery of the SIU is the biggest opportunity cost of our times. It's one of those things that my generation of policymakers should deliver as fast as possible.
So, did I understand correctly that would you say that actually saving investment union is actually one of the main projects on which the EU should focus on?
I would put it as number one.
Number one.
The SIU and defense. Those two projects, I would codify them as the two most significant projects that we need to deliver. Not generationally, now, here and now, because the opportunity cost of non-delivery is huge. For defense, it's self-evident. We have a war in our borders. But for the SIU, we had a tariff negotiation with the United States while we had hidden internal tariffs between us. Shouldn't we remove them?
Okay, maybe one last question. So we mentioned it several times. So for a long time, Greece was associated with deficit and debt. Now, actually, the debate has changed completely. And for instance, here in Belgium now, there is an extremely heated debate about the budget. Actually, the government seems unable to achieve a compromise or an agreement on the budget. Our neighbor, France, the debate about the reform pension and how to get the budget through the Congress is quite dramatic. Now, Greece went through all this. What advice, if any, would you give to policymakers here in Belgium or to Monsieur Macron in France?
This is why I said that the world is upside down, right? But when a Greek is answering this question, he or she should also be cognizant of the fact that the word hubris is also Greek. So we should be quite careful about how every fiscal and economic position is always historically fragile because it's a function of political stability. And this is my piece of advice. In reality, the budgetary delivery that you have seen, the fiscal delivery that you have seen, all of those results that you have seen in Greece are a function of the political will of the Greek people to have a stable government and to have a stable political system. Stability, there aren't, folk songs have not been written about stability, but it's like oxygen. If it's not there, you feel it. And we felt it. We felt it badly in the previous decade. So stability is the necessary condition, as we would say in mathematics, to build the edifice on top of it. So in all those cases that you mentioned, it's a function of the difficulty to forge coalitions or to create stable governments. The budgetary discussion is in effect a political discussion. It's not about per se the tax negotiation that you're seeing or you're hearing about from the French Parliament. It's about the majority. So what we have managed to achieve after a very problematic decade is a clear signal on behalf of the Greek public that they wanted reforms delivered at speed and at scale, and that they wanted stability in their political and their economic systems. So in reality, it's not an advice to policymakers as such. My advice to policymakers would be that you should have a nuanced reform package, a nuanced reform proposal when you're trying to govern. In our case, we were blunt about what we wanted to do. We said it before the election. We didn't overpromise and underdeliver. We specifically said what we wanted to do, and we did it. And we continued delivering. Have we made mistakes in the process? Yes, we have. We have been frank about them, and we learned from them when we move forward. But broadly speaking, what we wanted to do, people knew. And this is why they put us into office. So this is my advice to policymakers. Don't follow the old Mario Cuomo quote, campaign in poetry and govern in prose, keep it all along the same, say the same things before and after the election. But generally speaking, the message should be to the public. And the message to the public is attain stability through your political decisions.
Yeah, this is, I guess this is really a fundamental issue, but in societies and in countries which are becoming very polarized, this is probably one of the key challenges. Minister, can you stay a little bit more with us, or we are reaching, I know that you need to go to London. And,
I have to catch a train, but
catch a train.
5 minutes.
Maybe if there is one or two questions, we can get them. There is one here. We cannot take too many, but maybe we start here.
Hello, Maria Psara with FC Newspaper and Star TV Greece. I'll be very brief because I know you don't have a lot of time. First, a question, which is because the battle for the next MFF has started already, which are the red lines for Greece? And the second question, it's about the reparation law that you just discussed in the ECOFIN. From the three choices that Ursula von der Leyen presented on the loan to Ukraine, which one Greece could support? Thank you.
Maybe we take another one. There is a gentleman there and another one here.
Hello, Stanley Pignal from The Economist. Very briefly, how credible is the EU simplification agenda? Does it go far enough?
Those two and then,
Yeah.
okay. I'll start from the simplification agenda. I think it's credible. It's the most credible I've seen so far. We should do more, but broadly speaking, right now, I think that the heart of the Commission is at the right place. We're fans of the 28th regime. We believe in it, and we will be supporting a very aggressive simplification agenda in this regard as a government. By the way, our credibility in saying this is the fact that we have managed to produce something which I also presented at my colleagues at the Council. We have a platform in Greece called Mythos, which I think you might find interesting. It's mythos.gov.gr. Once you log in, it will be in Greek, so it will be Greek to you. But you can always translate the website, and there you can see that we have managed to map all the services that we offer to citizens and corporations, each and every one of them, and all the steps each one of the services entails, relevant EU law, relevant domestic law, cost of the service, average time to deliver the service, full description. What you can't measure, you can't reform. So my advice is that we should do that at the European level, because at the end of the day, if you look at those 5,500 services, pretty much half of them touch upon EU regulations and EU directives. And we need a very strong simplification narrative. We have, wherever it was implemented in other places in the world, it was extremely successful and popular. Gov.gr is perceived to be the second most popular reform overall in the history of the Greek government after the establishment of the national health system. Now, with regards to the other questions, I will reply in a broader sense. At the MFF, we're huge fans of cohesion policy, agricultural policy. We believe that the MFF should continue to adhere to the same principles that it adhered for decades. And even today, when we were discussing the energy taxation directive, those things touch upon each other. We believed that the extension, the 10-year extension in maritime and in aviation for the energy taxation directive was existential for cohesion policy and for Greek interests, but I would say for European interests overall. It's not only about the MFF. I would say that, touching upon your previous question, it's about how all of those things interact with each other. The problem, both at the national level and at the European level, historically for many things, is that they were very ad hoc and vertical, and they didn't horizontally interact enough with each other. So we view the MFF from the new lens of the RRF and of the implementation of the RRF. We support this change, and we will be very much, I would say, supportive of keeping cohesion funds in a similar situation as they used to be. Finally, on Ukraine, we already took a stance. we will be further discussing this, but what I can tell you right now is that we firmly support Ukraine, obviously, like all member states of the European Union. We believe that the policy that should be advanced needs to not only be a single move policy, but quite comprehensive, meaning that it should anticipate the reaction and that it should integrate the reaction, and perhaps certain things which are now treated at the national level should be pulled at the European level in the reaction. That's what I can tell you right now.
Okay, I think we have reached the end. Many thanks, Minister, for speaking to us and explaining actually quite a lot of things and new things which are happening in Greece, and it looks actually quite impressive with quite a lot of insights which could be useful also to other countries. Many thanks, and many thanks to all for being with us. Have a good evening.